Okay, welcome everyone to Hope Reform's Raising Anchor Virtual Conference 2026. We're kicking off our virtual conference in April of this year, where every Tuesday and Thursday we're going to be meeting with uh, a leader, a known visible figure in the leadership space that can speak to a very timely topic of our time, supporting workforces that are in human services, behavioral health, that are in desperate need of support, resilience, guidance, and hope. With us today, I couldn't be more pleased to introduce my colleague and my friend, whose work I've known for many, many years, and many across the country have followed, the great Felice Upton from Western Washington. Um, you can Google Felice and see an awful lot about what she's done in the survivor space, what she's done in adult corrections, what she's done in juvenile justice. And I couldn't think of someone more important to kick off our discussion this month in the service of workforces across the nation. Before we get into the conversation, Hope Reform is a nonprofit and 501c3 in the state of Washington. We are an accreditation and certification organization that is made up of globally known leaders in their respective spaces to offer overview, technical assistance, and guidance for agencies that are involved in crisis response programming to elevate their standards. There are a lot of organizations that really want to be great at crisis work, and we're here to help them and to extend certification to them under the Hope Reform label um, in their pursuit of excellence. And we're very proud to do that. Felice, welcome. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this topic. It's great to have you here.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks.
You know, Felice, of the things that you are known for, and there are several, one of the things that you're particularly known for is your, I think, fearlessness to talk about some less convenient topics in the leadership space. And one of them, categorically, is culture, and in particular, your gift at applying your lived experience and your professional experience in discussing culture and trying to help leaders move the ball downfield and bring everybody with them. You've been pretty outspoken about cultures that could be described as suck it up, press on. You can manage the injury. We have work to do, and I think everyone can understand that in pursuit of mission objective, there's discomfort along the way, but we have cultures that are dysfunctional and broken that are marked by those kinds of characteristics. That led you on a journey into looking at other people's research on that topic. And you've been able to kind of formulate some very concrete thoughts about what that data says. Maybe you'd be willing to get into that a little bit so that people who are watching this can learn more about what's out there, other people's research that speak to culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you said, I started in adult corrections, and it was at a time where we really didn't talk about how we were feeling about anything. I started an internship with the Department of Corrections in 2001, and then became a permanent employee in 2003. And really met a lot of great people that I watched start to fall apart over time.
Yeah.
And what I realized was, like, as a survivor, I'm really good at being able to name how things are impacting me, right? That over time, if your whole world has been shattered at some point, or you've been gaslit, or facts didn't line up, those things become really important to you. And you're really aware of the behaviors of others and how they may be devolving. And, you know, back in those days, you started to see cynicism. We saw a lot of alcoholism, domestic violence rates amongst corrections workers, and really got interested in it even then.
Yeah.
And as I promoted, really started to hone in on the best people, the most empathetic staff were the most impacted by what they were seeing and the conditions under which they were working. And we say in human services, we want folks to model the behavior that those we are kind of responsible for or serving can adapt to, mimic, whatever that is. And when all of the staff are kind of miserable and devolving, that's not great. And
Right.
we don't show up as our best selves. So really kind of the data points that I tend to share are levels of post-traumatic stress disorder in correctional staff as well as police officers.
Yep.
And then just post-pandemic, really talking about workforce shortages. And that has further exacerbated and kind of raised the issue. So really interested in having those conversations, as well as kind of the age of death of many people in these fields, both because of the physical toll as well as the emotional toll of working in really unnatural spaces, right?
The health implications are indisputable at this point. Like if you're not on the same page as the health data about the referrals to cardiac specialists, specialists regarding nervous system disorders. Our referrals are going through the roof now, particularly post pandemic, with our workforces. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the suicide rate of correction staff nationally is like not the rate, the age is the aggregate age is 58.
That's death
Lifespan.
rate. Yeah.
Death rate. Yeah.
Your death rate. Yeah. Which for many states is prior to their retirement age.
Yeah. Forgive me. I didn't mean suicide. It was definitely death
Yeah.
rate. I was aware of that, but it just came out. But suicidality is high.
It is.
And we're seeing that elevate too. You know, Felice, as a leader in the systems in which you've operated, as you became aware of this data, what do you think was what were the forces you were facing in trying to share truth to other leaders up and down the chain? What was the general reaction to that as you're translating your observations, which are very sensitive and acute, to, oh my goodness, these observations have been made elsewhere. They're covered in these research papers. Let me share this with you so that you can take a look at this and we can try to make some change together. What was your general experience of how that was received?
I think this is all really hard, right? That you, one, if you haven't lived it, if you haven't walked with the people, if you've never been at the cocktail party where you tell a story that like you thought became normal and people kind of backed away, like what is wrong with you?
Right.
Which I think all of us that have worked in really intense environments at some point, something became normal to you, or you saw something and didn't have time to unpack it. And because systemically, we don't facilitate those hard conversations, right? And we don't have necessarily time, space, capacity to do so. But if we mean to really change culture, we're going to have to wrestle with that. I think lots of times when we're having really heavy conversations, you find that especially people who have like survived trauma,
Yep.
don't expect predictability, right? So you saw lots of us do very well in the pandemic because like I never expected the ground to not shift under me. I've never had that.
Right.
So, right, people would get really used to that. And you saw people, formerly incarcerated folks, others who just have never had that stability, who did really well at maintaining. It was folks that have not had a ton of experience. I think what this takes is a scaffolding and looking at the foundational level which you really have to be able to step back. And I think most orgs can't step back from that firefighting, right? That they
Yeah,
want
the
to
demand is
respond.
too big.
Yeah, they're trying to respond to the stimuli right in front of them. And that often isn't the issue, right? You're de-escalating somebody on the street to kind of use your world. That is a failure of many orgs. The reason that person has to be de-escalated at this moment,
Yeah.
potentially.
Yes.
And that's one intervention. If we mean to actually change the thing, we're going to have to really pour into that individual, the systems. So, some of the things that I saw go really well, I managed a few units like at the women's prison where we got really good at unpacking incidents and really talking about, hey, what we saw today wasn't really normal or okay. And that was really hard. And it's okay to have that conversation and make space for it. And really talking about this, I think many times systems want to make it an individual issue, and wellness has to be a systemic issue, not an individual failing. That we are asking people to work in environments where they're exposed to populations that have high rates of trauma, and that will, of course, impact them over time. So how are we as employers, as organizations, supporting them in processing that?
I'm getting this thought as I'm listening to you speak this very important truth. And it sounds like your prototypical experience at the women's prison was to walk back things that had become normalized because of their frequency. In other words, hey, we witnessed something that really wasn't okay today. Yet that's something that's been witnessed so many times that there's, probably some kind of a um, apathetic or numbing affect that goes along with experiencing it. And you're trying to resensitize
Yeah.
people's emotional state to these very untoward things that happen in human services settings. And there's something to be said about that as a principle. We're talking about outcomes now where workforces are fatigued, workforces are tired. In fact, the whole theme of a conference that I'll be speaking at in the summer for the Council on Behavioral Health for Washington is in the service of the fatigued workforce. Um, our Northwest CIT Regional Conference, restoring
Yeah.
safety, dignity, and hope. Like everybody is on the same wavelength now with our workforces are fatigued. A core principle to attending to the workforce well being was described in your example. You're resensitizing people to the things that aren't normal. And somebody has to be courageous enough to do that.
Yeah.
And someone, I think, has to have the skill to do that. That is not a common skill. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not. It's also really hard. We've got to name our goals as workforces, right? As I talk to clients now, right? Like I talk to them about, do you want your workforce to survive? Do you want them to thrive? Do you want them to leave? Do you want to
Yeah.
break?
What's the objective? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, do you want people to have a good day? Do you want, if you're working in juvenile justice anywhere in the country, like the kids you serve are supposed to be looking at the employees as models of hope. And yet, in many places, those folks are so burned out and worn down. The kids are kind of looking at them like, I don't want to be like you. Right.
Yeah.
And as I have those conversations with folks, they're like, well, that's kind of true. So, what we know is that the number one predictor of well being is organizational support, not individual coping. We have to
Talk
support.
more about that. Yeah. I think people
We
are
got to
desperate to hear
support.
that.
Yeah, we have to support one, the person that works in the system. If you can support families, normalize what their loved one is going into every day, and then really kind of raise the game around what are our goals? Are we just trying to like stay off the news, treat the presenting problem, or do we actually mean to shift systems to do service? And what are our goals for our staff, right? This isn't a quick support program that intervenes following a
Right.
crisis.
Right.
It's
This isn't
proactive
fixed with a
support.
training. You just
Yeah.
don't buy a service and then
Yeah.
fix the culture problem.
And it's also alignment with what we say and what we do, right? So you hear a lot of folks that have like a well-being room that staff don't have time to go to,
Right.
or they
Or they're
have,
discouraged to use it.
yeah,
Yeah, you don't have time for that.
yeah,
Yeah.
or mandatory overtime, some of those things that are really kind of dismissive of family, dismissive of those people that are going to support you, right? That lack of sleep, how people function at that level. And then how are we pouring into our workforce? But really understanding that PTSD is like a normal response to something that is abnormal that you've witnessed. So in some cases, our environments are shaping that outcome for people. And because they're not allowed to, one, it's inconvenient, it takes time, it's going to take time off your, like, that we not only need the like psychologist to go meet with the person, you also need leadership behaviors that align with what you say you do. So is that person encouraged to talk about what they saw and get to the root of it? Or do we just need to like put out that fire, move on? And those are two different kinds of organizations.
Entirely different. I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on if that's what's facing, let's say, and I'm sure that there are administrators, mid-level managers, senior executives watching this broadcast now. And they agree. They agree that they're way too engaged in episodic firefighting.
Yeah.
To have the opportunity to attend to prevention. I think Desmond Tutu's quote is, "We got to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. We can keep pulling people out of the river here, but we got to find out why they're falling in."
Yeah.
What do you say to someone who's maybe feeling alone or struggling with a vision of how to get upstream?
Well, a colleague of mine told me many, many years ago, incremental change matters. And often it matters more than the leaps and bounds, right? That kind of the foundation of this is leadership, and leadership behaviors can't be unpredictable, misaligned. If you're saying and doing two different things, that doesn't work. We can't stigmatize help seeking. We should normalize and actually amplify that. Both because of the work we're doing, right? We're asking incarcerated folks, people who are hospitalized, to really process their trauma and do their work. But we're like, not you. You don't get to do this. But model how to act, even though you're sitting on these like really hard things you've seen.
Oh
And
my
we're gonna make
gosh.
you work 2 shifts.
We can't stigmatize help seeking.
Yeah.
Did you just string those words together on your own, or has you heard that expressed that way?
I mean, I don't know.
My gosh,
I'm not
we
going to
can't
take credit.
stigmatize help seeking. You know, like you, Felice, I've had the good fortune to, let's say, present what we do in environments that are more corporate in nature. And I find it interesting. Some of the corporate workforce environments, their cultures, I wish we had in human services. I won't name the company, but I remember visiting their corporate headquarters in Seattle, and I saw wide open spaces, people with flexibility to move about in shared workspaces that nobody had a claim on. Lots of provision for food, beverage, the consumption of media content on a big screen, an amphitheater. Bring your pet. Like now, I certainly think of the constraints of a psychiatric hospital or a prison, and I realize that we can't mimic those things. But boy, when I look at why corporate America, in many cases, provides so many supports for their employees, it's because they're paying attention to productivity, wellness, the reduction of health claims, referrals to EAP. They're looking at those things, and I'm wondering, why is it so hard for our domain to take advantage of these principles that, if they don't do them, it affects um, their productivity, their profit, their solvency, their success? Like, they've figured out, no, you have to do these things today. You don't not do them. You don't say one thing and do another. You make sure your mind, your body, and your behavior coincide, and they're all in the same room. And it seems like there's something we can learn from the private sector, if you will. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't talk enough about restoration of the individuals who serve in our systems. And I think you have seen public service and other kind of crisis response orgs really see a high level of burnout, which is really like when there's sustained exposure without restoration, people have to leave. And they leave worse than you found them, which is
Yes.
exactly what you don't want to do, right? Like, you have to have opportunities for people to leave, because this work long term, right? I do a bunch of work in sexual assault response systems.
Right.
Many times you can only do that work for so long, even with great restoration programs, even with, it's just too hard. But you do find people, when you stop talking about individual resilience and you start talking about organizational support, and you start normalizing that, like, the system is doing this to the people that work for it.
Right.
And you also start naming, like, what does a great day here feel like? Like, I think so many times we're talking about, how do we make the bad days stop? How do we make, how do we do recruitment? Everyone wants to talk recruitment. Most people have done pretty well at that the last few years. A lot
Yeah.
of what we have to look at is the retention. Like, you need folks to stay, folks to experience mastery at this work. And what we're seeing in the younger generations is they simply won't tolerate it. They just have, I always say, I really respect that they have better boundaries than we did. And
I agree with that appraisal. I do agree. And they're very outspoken about it.
Yeah.
And what I think is an interesting kind of recurring dynamic is that we have human services workforces that are incentivizing recruitment with bonuses, and people are not responding to that.
Correct.
Yeah, like, unless you have mastery, autonomy, and purpose to offer, I'm not interested in $10,000 to go into the meat grinder as a signing bonus. Like, they're figuring that out.
Yeah, because the cost to your life is more than that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I can't help but want to let you know how much I appreciate you brought about incremental change. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that a little more. Let's say a leader or a leadership team is witnessing this, saying, okay, so we're not going to, let's say, I'm going to say something in this broadcast. You don't have to say it. I'm going to say it. But because we know this is happening, or at least I do, and I'd be on any witness stand, speaking, if my life depended on it, this truth.
Yeah.
There are human rights violations occurring in all of these systems. Many leadership teams know this. Obviously, the pressure is we have to stop them, and they're so enormous that they can't do it tomorrow. You propose an alternative, incremental change. Instead of let's stop having bad days, your language is let's get to what's a good day look like, what's a better day like, how do we get there? What does incremental change look like
Mm-hmm.
for a leadership team that is wondering how that's defined? What would incremental changes potentially be?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first step as a leadership behavior is modeling that it's okay not to know everything, that your team has permission to be human and push back, and that that's actually encouraged, right? Like if we care about diverse perspectives, each person's coming with a unique worldview, we need to make space to be challenged and to really think about these things deeply. We need to have accountability without shame. We need to have trust by design, right? Like, and we also need to be able to, for the kind of old school corrections folks, name the issue, isolate the problem, contain it, and do something about it. And so many times that's not safe to say, that we have to be able, if I use your kind of example of a human rights violation, right? If you're looking at restraint or isolation or use of force, many of the things that I have clients that are working on pretty hard, they have to have the safety to be able to say, we have a big problem and we're not going to be able. It was interesting. I was talking to a client this week who had kind of a larger use of force issue. And I said, I implemented with Andy and others this kind of robust use of force protocol after naming an issue that I had seen in an organization that I led, and wanting to do reviews thoughtfully, but also de-escalation
Right.
and have some really strong support. And the person said, we tried, we're working on lean lag measures. So I said, like, sometimes what we want to do is also increase family engagement. We want to normalize humanity. You don't have to like hit the thing you're trying to get at. You also can support that through other measures. And so that individual shared that their numbers were down by half of what their incidents had been. They're using some of the protocol that I had given them, and we helped write some policy. We've done some stuff, but it's still pretty high. And so they feel like there's a win, but they can't say that as a leader because they know that it won't be honored, that this is incremental. They had this like really extreme problem. Now it's kind of mid-rate. They want to celebrate the staff. How are they going to go about doing that, even though it's not at zero like we would like?
Oh, God bless you for saying this. I think
Yeah,
people need to hear that it takes a very special leader to make incremental gains, but to also have to continue to shoulder the burden of, reaching the objective, which may or may not occur in their tenure.
sure. Sure. And it's why it is such an honor to walk alongside leaders as they
Yes.
shoulder these, get right, that I get to walk with her or other leaders and say, it's all going to be worth it, because every use of force, every restraint has like potentially permanently changed a trajectory of those we serve. This is important work. And the more we dog and pony, the more we pretend it's not there, the more we just like clean it up. One, it's a betrayal. It's a betrayal of those we serve. It's a betrayal of our team.
Yeah.
And it also results in, one of the things I'm pretty critical of myself and others that like in the system that I continue to name is, we often don't share, what do we do? We talk a lot about what we don't do.
Right.
Uh,
What are the instructions? What are the action items? What are we going to do?
yeah. And what's the complexity there, right? Like, we're talking about human beings all the way around in really unnatural conditions all the way around, with exposure at different levels, right? Like, I am
Yeah.
not saying that somebody who works in a prison has the same experience as somebody who's incarcerated. They are very different. And both are traumatic, and we don't compare traumas, right? Like, I always tell folks who say, like, well, I know you've been through a lot. Well, okay. But each person has a different filter. I cannot imagine the world, the fear that people who are incarcerated, who lose that autonomy, who see leadership behaviors that are unpredictable, and see staff
Yeah.
that are kind of dysregulated have to go
Yeah.
through. Um, the kind of cornerstone of all trauma-informed design is predictability and reliability. So how are we
Yes.
providing that?
Felice, um, the incremental change alone that might be experienced from a workforce when a leader who was previously guarded, maybe not
Yeah,
really out front with vulnerability, engages the workforce differently to say, I'm arriving at the conclusion that while I'm the right person for this job, I don't know how to address this problem, and I really need your support and feedback and information to help me make better leadership decisions
correct.
to advance um, our responsibilities and objectives ethically. Uh, I always experienced you and some others like Greg and Kevin and others that we know, people who were willing to be very clear about what's important and also be kind of fearless in describing what their own, let's say, uh, opportunities for improvement might be. You might describe that as vulnerable leadership or using vulnerability. But I could totally see how a workforce would experience that as an incremental change. Like, wow, all of a sudden, my 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 opinions are being sought. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that and where you've seen some successes in your own career that way.
Yeah. I'm looking at some notes that I wrote around, creating permission to tell the truth and how important that
Oh, I
is
love that. Yes, creating
for
permission to
us.
tell the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, I think that's foundational for this type of culture change that I am seeing a couple of teams that I'm working with nationally who got really brave and were able to say, I don't think this is great. We're not going to pretend. We want to actually solve problems, as you know, right? Like we really like to say, like, nothing to see here, nothing to see here.
Right.
Um, and in 12-step programs and other things, like secrets keep you sick. So
Yes.
how are we going to amplify what's wrong so that we can actually fix it? Um, in my mind, that's just basic integrity. I think that's what I see in Kevin and many of the other folks is like, how do you live with yourself if you don't use that platform for good and ignore things that are harming people, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
how do you sleep at night? And it's okay to say, hey, we got some problems, and to have that bravery, because the alternative is like you're modeling abuse, right? Like you're telling everyone there's nothing to see here and secrets are keeping you sick. So I think it's creating permission to tell the truth. It's modeling your own vulnerability and being able to say, yeah, I got a title, but I don't know everything.
Yeah.
I'm also not supposed to.
Oh, these are
And
diamonds. These are
yeah,
diamonds you're just throwing out there. People need to understand this, Felice.
yeah. And then also like I think the fallacy of sunk cost really like paying attention to. So many times we say, well, this is the right way to fix it. And then you receive new information. And
Yeah.
folks are so on that path that they're unwilling to say, right? When I started in corrections, we had methamphetamine and pot. At the time, I think marijuana was still illegal, right? So, like, those are the things you would find. And now you have fentanyl. And those two things are not the same response. So if I had taken that approach that we had back then of like potentially in a search, you find marijuana in a
Right.
crinkly packet, that's a
Right.
very different thing. Also, overdose exposure. How are we treating like we should be evolving, and we should be able to say, yeah, based on what I saw in the world, I thought this was what was creating the harm. I was wrong. And I'm smart enough to be able to say I was wrong and not like ride the ship to the bottom of the ocean, right?
Yeah.
That like
Yeah.
there are
Right.
things I've pushed in my career early in my career that I at the time were for gender responsive care, right? Like we've now kind of expanded that. That is a different world. And potentially some of us did harm through not knowing what would come 5 years from then or 10 years from then, but we were operating on the information available to us. So I think I always encourage people, like very early in my career, I had training at CJTC where the training was what's happening now and evaluating what's happening around
Right.
you and being able to make decisions. I think it's also like some of the leadership behaviors that create permission to tell the truth are responding to bad news with curiosity, not punishment. That like, is it safe for somebody to run in your office and say, like, I just screwed up? And your forced reaction would be, what were the conditions that caused that? I'm not looking at you as like, I'm looking at that systemically, and that really isn't informed by a period of my career where I did systemic investigations for the Department of Corrections statewide.
Yeah.
And what we were really looking at was, so the outcome, I was a PREA, or Prison Rape Elimination Act
Right.
investigator. So we looked
Right.
at complex, sensitive sexual assaults that had occurred in carceral environments. And often, like, what happened was clear. We know what happened. What part of my job was interviewing everybody and talking about that. The other part was, what were the systemic functions at the foundation that led to that, right? So you
Yeah.
have to have somebody who perpetrates the assault. You have to have that interaction. But in order to have that, were cameras offline for significant periods, were people experiencing drift in their jobs? What were those exacerbating factors? And could somebody, if they felt supported and safe, would they have amplified that ahead of time? Or are those who amplify those things punished? Also, using language that normalizes struggle and never, everyone's reaction is their reaction, and that's okay. You see that
Right.
in survivors, right? Like people want
Right.
to talk about model a survivor of rape looks like this or acts like this. They don't. They
Right.
don't. Like there
There
is
is
a
no
model of
template.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But like
Exactly.
they don't. And so we're not going to minimize emotional reactions to critical incidents. We're going to say that was a hard shift. Let's talk about it. Let's make space for it. What do you need from me? And then, yeah, sharing near misses. Help seeking isn't career suicide, right? That like
Right. We can't
more than,
stigmatize help
yeah,
seeking.
right.
That's a huge takeaway. And I'm gonna I'm gonna wrap up with this direction.
Yeah.
Um, I think there are people who are hearing these recommendations, in some cases, having heard them elsewhere or previously, also hearing some new ones in a new way. Maybe some are feeling fear to start. In other words, I don't think there's any escape from the personal discomfort of leaning into change. There is no approval that's going to come from on high to say it's okay for you to begin developing a safe culture around discussing adverse events and mistakes, a non punitive culture. No one's going to say that. So a leader has to lean into, I think, courage. And there is no such thing as courage without feeling fear. That's what courage requires. It requires fear. Otherwise, it's not courageous. So, what would you say to executives who are hopefully feeling inspired by some of your message? How do they get started? What's the first action they could take to begin to lean into this direction that you're painting an image of.
Yeah, I'm thinking about your comment on courageousness and that coming from the word cur, which is heart, right? That
Yeah.
you don't have a heart for the work. Somebody recently said, what do you think of leaders who are not okay accepting a challenge to their perspective? And I think my response wasn't their favorite. It was like, I'm so sorry, that's not called a leader, that's called a dictator. Like those are two different profiles, right? That like
Right.
leaders are courageous. And if you have that platform and that seat at the table, right? Like I started as a young woman in the Department of Corrections and often was pretty counterculture around wanting to tell my survivor story and normalize that for those I served and normalize it for other survivors and be able to say that. And that came at potential cost to me, but it also came at huge benefit to many people who I now have really in-depth relationships with for many years, and also normalized that, I mean, 1 in 3 women has been sexually assaulted.
Right.
You're working with women who, like, how are we talking about that, and how are we normalizing that it's okay to talk about it, and that doesn't make you less than or really victim blaming in its other sense. I think so. I would start with, if that's a question, really sitting down and writing down your non-negotiables around your own ethics, your own boundaries. Did you come to the table to reset the table or just participate in a show?
Oh gosh,
Right?
yes.
Like
Yes, that's
how,
heavy.
and don't occupy the seat. You're not a leader if you won't do brave things. You're just not. That you are carrying the responsibility to be brave, with your words, to be brave with your life, that you potentially, and I think, over the years, I've had this conversation with many leaders. Some of the things I've created with teams stuck once I
Yeah.
left, some
Yeah, yeah,
didn't.
yeah. Yeah.
But regardless, because people often are like, well, what if I do all this work and then I leave and it goes back? Well, you inspired a few people who saw it could be done. And that's really important,
Oh
right?
gosh.
It's really
Felice,
important.
you're there to be brave. You said it.
Yeah.
You're there to be brave.
Yeah.
You're there to be brave. If you are there to just watch the show, that you are going to carry some responsibility at the end of the day with things that aren't going well that you may not put on yourself, but eventually somebody will. That karma bus is going to catch up.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, I have seen that. I have seen people, because you and I have been at this for a while
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
where I would say low ego functioning in a position of leadership so that no waves can be made will catch up to your career later in ways that are not constructive. If you're there, be brave.
Yeah.
If you're there, make the decisions that resensitize the adverse events that have become normal. Be brave. Share the data. Be
Yeah.
brave. Be vulnerable. Be brave enough to be. I mean, what gems out of you today, Felice?
Thanks. You just sparked a thought that as we talk about people that we serve in these systems, truth and alignment matters. And many people who are drawn to this kind of work also have their own experience.
Yep.
And those two populations often are more similar than I think everyone realizes.
Yeah.
And part of post-traumatic growth, which is another topic I talk a lot about, right? Because we
Yep.
talk about post-traumatic stress a lot and all of the
Yep.
downsides. But post-traumatic growth, if believed, if treated well, if somebody makes space for you after can really create such beauty. And it's not great that you had to go through something, but some of the best moments for me are, well, one, being able to live with myself and my decisions and know sometimes you're going to go in challenging decision. You're going to get stuck in these really challenging spots, but did somebody feel seen because of it? Because that can change their whole life, right?
Yeah.
And
Oh,
I think, all of us that work in human services, you start with, day one, you're going to go in, you're going to save the world. And then year 3, you're like, maybe I'll just like minimize it a little. Like that goal was, are hundreds of people thanking you, potentially not, just changing one life at a time, or even instilling belief in oneself before they can see it, planting those seeds in those we like those that we're working with, seeing that really matters too. Like you had talked earlier about maybe you don't see the fruits of that labor. Watching people who worked for me, like on teams a decade or more ago, thrive now.
yeah.
I didn't do it, but
Yep.
hopefully I planted like half a seed that helped, or
That's a gift as I age
yeah,
too, to
it's the
witness
best.
that somebody I
Yeah.
influenced 15 years ago, 10 years ago, has done something with that. And, um, I, Felice, listening to you made me think of my own transformation when I thought that I could stop the unnecessary suffering now. Like, this
Mhm.
is easy to fix. Let's just go at it hard and we can stop it. And in the stopping it, it was a great big mess where we were going fast, but alone instead of far together.
Yeah.
And um, I have become willing to accept today, more than I ever have, that in my lifetime, things that I would have liked to have seen on the outcome front, we're probably not going to get to. And I'm not saying that to discourage the pursuit. I'm
Yeah.
simply saying that um, my dad used to describe it. You've heard me mention this plenty of times. It's like pushing a big rock up a long hill. And I get more joy now out of getting more people to help with the push
Yeah.
than throwing all of my weight into it and every drop that I have in a moment to only get it to go a foot. We've got to get it up to the top, and we need people to replenish the fatigue and the aging of other people like you
Mhm.
and me who have been at this for a while.
Yeah.
And your message really speaks to, I think, you want to get more people behind this rock? Here's the culture that we set on the team that's doing the pushing. You
Yeah.
make it safe for people to say, this hurts. This sucks. This is heavy. You
Yeah.
make it safe to say, I wonder if we should be pushing in that direction because it looks like a little less of an incline than it is right now.
Yeah.
And you allow the leader to even say, well, what do you guys think? Because I can't see right in front of me right here. What are you
Yeah.
seeing? And I
Yeah.
will trust your judgment. Um, what wonderful, wonderful gems out of you today on this topic. Any final thoughts?
I think, as you just spoke, thinking about the clarity that comes with allowing space. And I think that our world often is not allowing any spaciousness to really see the full picture, right?
Yeah.
When you so as I talk about workforce retention with folks, often what they talk about is, folks go through the academy, then they hit the space and they quit. And yeah, there's no way to predict how your nervous system is going to react to a space. And that's okay. That like the work isn't for everyone. But how are we talking about changing what the nervous system does in that space for everyone? Because
Yes.
asking individuals to kind of become a robot isn't okay either. but also allowing, like, I think in our modern world, and this is me talking about parenting and leadership and like all the
Yeah,
things,
fair enough.
creativity comes from a little bit of spaciousness, and you will never see the whole problem or the foundational issue if you're focused on like what you see in front of you,
Yeah.
because your windshield is tiny at that point, and you need to understand how each operational decision is impacting each other, right? So when I talk about use of force with folks I work with, and I'm talking about family engagement, they're like, how does that change use of force?
Right. Because your view is much wider of the
Right.
playing field. You have a much more elevated view, and
Correct.
I'd say you're being strategic in your choices to get to the objective by these other supportive things that maybe surround the central target, but you
Yeah.
got to grab them if you want to hit the bullseye.
Yeah. And then, I think, you had asked what I would share with leaders to kind of push that, like,
Yes,
they like
please.
this concept. What are they going to do next? I have a few questions that I'll offer to them. And I consistently coach people to embrace the messy middle, right? Like, just sit down and write. And none of it has to make sense, but responses to the following questions, which are, here's where I would start and where I encourage folks to start. What does your agency invest more in, teaching people to cope or changing the conditions that make them have to cope?
Oh, listen to that. Listen to that. Is it resilience or changing the environment? That's
Yeah.
what you're comparing.
Well, and you
Yeah,
can't, I mean, if you say it more simply, right? So often we're like, well, Andy just can't tolerate working here.
right. Which I've heard.
What?
I've heard that.
I wasn't saying it about you. You're just
I
confirming.
know. I know.
But
Yeah.
like, if we said that about any other, like a crime survivor, or like, we don't do that. You don't do that. That doesn't make sense. You victimize somebody and now you're blaming them for it. The
Yeah.
system is the problem, right? I think, and sometimes it's not, but very infrequently is the system not an add-on there. I
Yeah.
think, the second question I would ask people was, when's the last time your leadership team talked about staff wellness with the same rigor that you talk about operational readiness?
Oh, all right. Pile them on. Pile
All
them on.
right.
These are great final thoughts.
I'm going to leave you with one more, which is, if burnout is predictable, what are we doing to prevent it, not just respond to it? Because as leaders, we should feel responsible for those we're bringing into this world. And once you know better, you should do better, right? Like, I think about the world I started in, where I had a particular lieutenant who liked to scream at people, and that wouldn't, so we've come a long way, and I adore him and still talk to him, and we've grown.
Sure. Sure.
Um, and very different time, very different knowledge that you would see something traumatic happen, and again, this really unnatural conditions. So, like, how are you moving the humanity in that space? So, I think we've come a long way. I think we have a really long way to go.
Yeah.
And we have
Yeah.
to start naming what we're doing, so that kind of the moral injury that comes with the work often, for our line staff or those closest to the work, we have to support them through so that they know that their work it matters.
You know,
Um,
Felice,
yeah.
and I mean this so genuinely. I am humbled every time we have a discussion on these topics because um, I'm going to use a phrase you haven't used, but I'm so impressed by your remarks, your thoughts, all go to the heart of a moral imperative in leadership decision making. And you never describe it as that, but that's how I always hear your message, is that you are so through dyed, like conscientious through all of your cells with a moral imperative driving action. And whether that applies to self or external decisions. And I'm so humbled and impressed by your consistency with that I want to thank you so very much for you sharing your perspective, which is very hard earned. Those of us who know you know that you've paid the suffering toll in your career to be able to expound on these principles in a credible way. And I thank you so very much for your willingness to come to the Hope Reform Raising Anchor virtual conference and share with our viewers what they can do to begin to move the needle on change and support their workforces that are fatiguing. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm grateful to be here and hope I provided some hope to folks. And the feeling's mutual, my friend. I have been honored to work alongside you these many years and
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
difference we've been able to make together.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. And to our viewers, please look in the comments and the links within the comment section or in the description for you to consider a donation to Hope Reform. Also, please like and subscribe to the Hope Reform YouTube channel. All of our Raising Anchor speakers this year are going to be featured in their entirety on the YouTube channel. We are separating access to the content from the donation link, and we're just going to make their content available to the world because what they have to say, the world can benefit from. Thank you so very much for being with us. Felice, thank you.
Thank
All the
you.
very best to you, and
You
take
as
good
well.
care.
Take care.